I'm Mike Costello, and I'd like to talk to you in the next few minutes about the way that you think. What is it that you think? What goes on in your minds? We believe that we live in our minds and not in the world. The problems, the difficulties, the triumphs, and the joys of life are all states of mind, even though circumstances and situations present themselves, and we all go through a myriad of different kinds of experiences of life. What really matters is what happens in our minds. We understand that there is a law of universal attraction. That is, like attracts like. If your thought process, if my thought process is negative, it creates within us a form of negativity. If we create a process of mind which is creating a positive outlook on the experiences of life, we attract like experiences. No one has the ability to affect you as much as you do. We believe so often that when people say things, when experiences come into our lives, that these experiences, that these people, that these things that are said are really the things that make us feel the way that we feel. But we feel the way that we feel within ourselves, and the responsibility for our own feeling is born in our state of mind. There's a story told by Emmett Fox, a New Thought teacher and wonderful author of the early part of this century. And he talks about the fact that a lady from a prayer group came to him with a problem about her prayer group. And she said that the prayer group was a wonderful group of people who knew each other, loved each other, and were very positive and supportive. Someone joined the group, and that person was disruptive and created problems for the group. One of the things that this woman said to Emmett Fox was, "She came and she spoiled everything." He thought for a moment, and his response to her was, "That woman didn't spoil anything. The other person didn't spoil your group. You spoiled the group because of your way of thinking. The fact is that that woman changed her way of thinking about the group because someone within the group said or did something." Emmett Fox had a marvelous way of telling stories and sharing those stories and allowing them to speak the words of truth and to bring to those who listened to him and read his writings the truth of New Thought as a philosophy and as a religion. He talked often about the fact that in his day, movies were a new thing, a new idea and a new way of bringing information to people. But there were many places where people hadn't seen movies at the turn of the century and in the early part of this century. And so in some far removed area, someone brought a movie projector and brought a movie of the day. And as many of those early silent movies portrayed, there was a villain and there was a good person, and the strife between good and evil was portrayed on the screen. One of the people who were watching happened to be a cowboy, someone who spent his life on the range, living in the wild. Never had seen any of the marvels that he saw in the form of moving pictures, and he was just amazed by what he saw. And as the story unfolded in that silent movie, this cowboy, who was seeing for the very first time the marvel of a movie, sat just transfixed by what he saw. And at a point in time when the villain was about to harm the heroine of the story, the cowboy stood up, drew his gun, and shot at the screen. He was shooting at the screen because he believed that by shooting the bullet at the screen, he could affect what was taking place. But in truth, he shot at the screen, but the source of what was coming, the source of the picture, was the projector. And it was coming from the projection and being portrayed on the screen. In our day, we see video recordings very often, and we place video recordings in our video recorders or players at home, and we watch the video. And we know that the video that we're watching, the picture that we're seeing, is coming from another source. If we want to change the picture that we're seeing on the screen in today's modern video, with today's modern video technology, or in the past with the old projection system, what needed to be changed was the projector, the source that was sending out the picture. Our minds operate very much like that, and life is exactly the same as watching that movie picture, whether it is an old silent picture with little understanding or whether it's a new and modern video projection system that we might have in our homes. We understand and know that our minds operate to project onto life the picture that we're seeing. And if we need to change, or if we want to change the picture that appears on the screen, if we want to change what's taking place in our lives, we need to change the projector. We need to change the tape that is playing. And as we change that, as we identify ourselves and our mind with this technology that we understand so well, we understand that we have to change what's coming from inside and seeing what's happening outside. Emmett Fox told the lady who had the problem with the other person in her prayer group or study group that the problem wasn't the other person. The problem was her perception, her view of what was taking place in life. Many things come into our life experience. Sometimes they're problems that bring us difficulties with health or with family or with jobs or with finances. In all of these things, it is what takes place in our minds that matters. And as we think about a thing, as we respond to a thing, as we see it in our minds, so it projects onto life. And so it is with our emotion and our feeling and the quality of our life. We're invited to change our way of thinking. And when we change our way of thinking, we change the way that we look at what is taking place in our lives. And when we do, when we come to a point of changing the way that we think, when we align our thinking with right mind, with right thinking, and as we say in New Thought, with divine mind, then magnificent things begin to happen. And we are able to act and react to the experiences of life in a totally different way. It doesn't mean that the picture will be changed. It means, though, that we will change our way of thinking about the picture. Once we're empowered and strengthened with this dynamic ability to control the process of mind, it doesn't matter what happens in our life experience, because in our mental process, in our mental outpicturing, in our response to what happens, we will be guided and directed in ways that we would have never imagined. And we are able to center ourselves then in a peaceful presence that allows us to deal with the circumstance and situation, to grow through it and to go through it. And in the process, the experience isn't the important issue, but the important issue is how we see it and what we feel within. One of the most effective ways to deal with changing the way that we think is to become aware of how it is we view life, whether we view life in a positive way or in a negative way. If you happen to be an individual who views life in a negative way, then your challenge is to change the way that you think about that which you see in life, and to change the process of mind. Because remember, as we said in the beginning of this talk, like attracts like. And if your mind process, if the thinking of your conscious mind brings forth negativity and views experiences in a negative way, then the experience will be negative. But if the negative experiences are viewed in a positive way, even though they may not be what we want to see or experience, but we view them as opportunities to change our way of thinking about the circumstance and situation, we can see things within the experience that maybe we never saw before. Very often when we pay bills, we're upset about the fact that we have bills, that we have limited resources, that we have to use our money to pay those bills. But in truth, the payment of bills creates an opportunity for us to have things, to have comfort, to have homes, to have food, to have electricity, to have transportation. And so even though we see paying bills as a negative, if we look and change our way of thinking about the paying of those bills and the challenge of those bills, we can approach the issue in a totally different way and begin to look at it differently. If we write a check on the universe, when we write a check in our checkbook, we write out the check and we give it to the bank, and for it we have a bill paid or we receive cash back. If you work, you receive a paycheck, and when you receive that paycheck, you take it to the bank and exchange it for cash. Those are tangible, physical ways of exchanging money, exchanging things that we can touch and feel in our lives. But we exchange in the very same way, with the very same impact, through the process of our mind. Every time we think, we're writing a check on the universe in terms of what our life is and how it appears to be. We're writing a check and creating the environment in which we live. The most magnificent way in which we write checks to the universe is through our thought and spoken word. When we speak words and we say them out loud, they are outpicturing what is going on in our minds. The greatest creative force is that statement, I am. When we say, I am anything, if we say, I am tired, I am old, I am weak, I am sick, when we create that thinking in our mind, and when we embrace that ideation, that idea, and bring it into our life experience, it creates for us and draws upon this universal resource, this universal check. If we write a check in a positive way and we affirm that I am strong, I am whole, that I am at peace, that creates for us also the ability to draw upon the resources of the universe, and we receive like unto ourselves from the thoughts that come into our minds and proceed out into the way that we view life. What kind of checks are you writing? What kind of environment are you creating? What kind of life are you experiencing? It is a direct and corresponding result of the way that your mind operates, and the dynamic of mind action can create either a positive or a negative experience. Every one of us learn the negative I ams of life. As children and young people and young adults and into middle age and into maturity, we see the reality of saying and thinking, I am this or I am that. For some of us, it is an issue of nationality. I am an American, or I am French, or I am Spanish. Maybe it's a political identity. I am Republican, or I am Democrat. Maybe it is an identity of how you feel. I'm tired, I'm weak, I'm strong, I'm empowered. The way that you think and the things that you say determine the quality and the fiber of your life. Just as some of us learned to create negative thoughts, we can learn to create positive thoughts. And when we learn to create positive thoughts and to embrace the concept of positive thinking, then life becomes a totally different experience than it was when we looked to the negative experiences. What is it that you think? Examine your own ideas and thoughts. Listen to what you say. Tune in on that all-important word, I am. And if the I ams of your life are more negative than positive, if the I am is seeing things in a difficult, painful, and struggling way, we invite you to change the way that you're thinking and to create the universal law of like attracting like in a positive way. And when you do that, you can change your negatives into positives. You can change the way that you think and thereby change the quality of your life. No matter what problem you face, no matter what difficulty comes into your life experience, no matter what your religious faith or tradition is, you have the ability and the power within you to change your way of thinking. And when you do that, you can change the quality of your life. We believe in prayer as a centering force in the universe, and so we would like to invite you at this point in the program to pause for a moment of reflection with us. Eternal and loving God, we gather together our hearts and minds in the awareness of your divine presence. And in that divine presence, we claim the positive and living aspects of life. We view our problems and difficulties and triumphs in an uplifting way, and we embrace those thoughts with you in the name of faith, in the name of hope, in the name of love. Amen.
That was a wonderful reminder of the power of thought, that every thought we think is important.
Very, very important. And the thoughts that we think create the environment of our lives. And so often we believe or have the idea that external things, that people or circumstances or situations are causing us to be unhappy, when in truth, the only unhappiness comes from our submission to unhappiness and unhappy thoughts.
Allowing ourselves to be in the slough of despondency, allowing ourselves to think low thoughts. And when, by the same token, we can think higher thoughts. And even when we're going through our most troubled times, we have inspirational things to guide us. The Bible, many wonderful books, pamphlets and articles, and just reading those will often lift us. And of course, the best of all, prayer.
All of those things contribute to conditioning our way of thinking and conditioning our mind. I like the story that I shared from Emmett Fox about the lady in the prayer group, because so often in our churches and in our prayer groups, but also in our families and communities and neighborhoods and business places, we believe that certain people say or do things, and that because they say or do things, they control the environment. And like in the case of the lady, the story that we shared, the lady had said that the group was so happy and so congenial until this one person came and they ruined it.
Yes.
And Emmett Fox was so wonderful in bringing the teaching when he told the lady, that individual didn't ruin it, you ruined it.
Yes.
And not only did you ruin it, but you ruined it for the group, and the group ruined it because they accepted that and they created the environment.
And that's a wonderful lesson, and we can all take it to heart. And also, we can always remember that every thought we think, everything we do, every act, every thought, every deed is recorded in the Akashic records. Mm-hmm. It's in the Akashic record of our heart chakra, the seed atom of our heart chakra, and in the space-time Akashic records. Mm-hmm. I was just reading today about Edgar Cayce's description of the Akashic records, and I don't think he called them that. He just he defined them as opposed to giving them a name. But we know that those records exist, and those who are clairvoyant can see them, and those who are trained can go and ask permission to see them. They're only granted permission if they have been asked by the person involved to do that. They don't get permission to go if it's something that they do of their own volition from curiosity or from wanting to know. Then those angels who guard the Akashic records don't allow them to access that material unless they have permission. I think that's interesting, don't you?
Mm-hmm. Very interesting, and I think it limits the record of the past, and it limits our ability to draw upon that until the time is appropriate and the need is noble and right.
Yes, and that's a wonderful thing, that people can't just do it indiscriminately and then use it in an adverse way.
A similar situation is when we think about our spiritual reality. So often people say, well, if we're truly spiritual and if we truly lived before and if we're eternal, why don't we remember? Why don't we have recall from where we have been and a more direct connection to spirit? But as long as we're in the physical realm and in this life experience, if we're not able to consciously experience this moment and this life and this time, then it detracts from the spiritual growth that comes from the experience. And so through divine and infinite intelligence, we are not conscious of all of the past because we would be so inundated with it and so inundated with the spiritual reality that we would cease to function on the physical realm.
Yes, we couldn't bear all the information that would be available to us, but we can get that information as we need it whenever we wish through our meditation and through dream work too.
Mm-hmm. And the Akashic records that you were mentioning, many different people call them by different names, and they are essentially the record of time and the remembrance in the mind of God.
Yes.
And that is a divine record, and it is the mind of God.
Yes, and we know that they are on the astral plane, and we don't need no more than that, just that they are available to us. And that's often where we go in our dreams to review those records, because we can gain access to them ourselves if we, again, as you said, if the purpose is noble, if we need the information. And we can review our own records, and often do, and in meditation, and that's what happens in past life therapy. They go back to access information that's available there, and it's a wonderful thing. If we need to know, then it comes to us. If we don't need to know, I think then it doesn't.
Mm-hmm. And in past life therapy, we see over and over, and of course in your work in past life therapy, which is extensive, I'm sure you've seen so many people who in each life experience continue to relive the same experiences. And I think the key there is that the way of thinking and the at-one-ment or the attunement or the at-one-ment, as we like to say, with the divine mind of God is teaching us constantly and cultivating our right and proper way of thinking.
Yes, that was a good point, because just last week there was a lady who was her lesson. I always ask, and what lesson did you learn from that lifetime? What's the basic lesson you learned from that lifetime? And in every case, it was to value love. And so she had the need to value love, and she brought out 3 different lifetimes to some extent, and in every case, that was her lesson. And 2 of those lifetimes were very lives of great privation, very poverty-stricken. Material things were just lacking in her life. totally, and she was so tired most of the time because of the hard work she had to do. But in one lifetime, she was so free, and she had a wonderful home life, a husband and 5 children, and it's what many people would think of as ideal. And of course, it wouldn't necessarily be ideal for some people. We know people who have 5 children and a family, and they really want to get out in the business world. But that's what she wanted at that time because of her other lives that had brought her forth to that time.
And it's interesting also that people in general, and most people that we talk to, really don't go through a period of self-examination in terms of what it is that they need to learn,
Yes.
or what it is that life is bringing to them, because every one of our experiences is bringing us a spiritual lesson, bringing us something that we need to understand and know. And so when we have both negatives and positives, both the happy experiences and the painful experiences, we need to open ourselves to learn what we need to learn.
Yes, and that's a very good point. And most of us don't look in that way, but we don't have to go through a past life therapy session to do that. One good way is to form life goals and have like a 3-year plan or a 5-year plan, or even make that plan be months. And that is a very good way to gain an introspective vision within ourselves to see where we're going and what we really want. There are many ways we can do that. It doesn't just have to be something where someone else helps us, but introspective on our own.
It's interesting how many people go through life never with a thought of that, never with a thought of why am I here, what am I learning. We want to answer the big questions. We want to know the universal answers to major issues. But really life is a process of learning through experience by experience, and each one is teaching us something, and we would all do well to look within and to seek that inner guidance.
That's true, and I think those of us who have looked in an introspective way all our lives, and many of us have brought that through from other lives, and probably it was because in other lives we were rather shiftless in that way. And so we brought through this need, and I know I'm one of those, to know and to look often. And I'm sure it's because I had very useless lives and didn't do very much spiritual work at all. In fact, in one past life therapy session, I found that was true, that in 2 lives, a certain punishment I received in this life as karma, the law of cause and effect, were enacted because I had not used the spiritual knowledge that I knew. In 2 prior lives, it had just lain dormant, and I had not used it at all, which is saying the same thing in a different way.
And in that process, it took longer for you to accomplish what you needed to accomplish.
Yes.
And by accomplishing what you needed in a shorter period of time, your lives would have been different, your experience would have been different. But the important issue is that we learn the lessons.
Yes, and that's the important issue. And one way or another, we're prodded by those on the inner and by our own higher consciousness to look in just those ways. And one way I think that we can do that is through one-pointed thinking. Too often we just let our thoughts be scattered, and you touched on that in such a wonderful way, that if we're one-pointed in our thinking, then we're far more apt to fulfill what we came here to do than if we just let our thoughts be scattered all the time.
And the use of affirmations, and we talked about that briefly in the talk, the I am words and the I am statements create for us a blueprint of how it is we ought to be thinking. And if we use those words as centering points, it's very, very true, and the point that you made is wonderful, and that is that we can only think of one thing at a time. We may think of many things in succession, and often we think in disjointed ways because our mind just goes crazy. And so often when people are confused or upset, they talk about being confused or disoriented. But if we think and center our thought process on one thing, and if we affirm that clearly, and if we attach our mind to that, and especially that being peace, the presence of God, health and wholeness, strength and empowerment, those things can really bring us to the ability of changing our way of thinking and changing our lives.
Yes, and I think if we were going to give one lesson that's important, that would be it, to be one-pointed in one's thinking. I remember an aunt of mine once, years ago, was looking really serious, and I said, "What are you thinking?" because it looked as if there was something wonderful going on there. And she said, "Oh, I was thinking of a lot of things at one time." And I was quite disappointed. And I think that was my inner self nudging me to not do that, to think in a one-pointed way.
But she was very preoccupied because of the fact that her mind was moving.
Yes.
And she, of course, was moving with that. And as she shared with you, she was in a state of flux or confusion.
Yes, that was it. She was very confused and very frustrated. And so she needed to be one-pointed in her thinking and then just think through one thing at a time. And then she would come to some logical conclusions, because the important thing is we don't come to logical conclusions if we just are thinking of more than one thing at a time.
There's very little logic in our confusion.
Yes.
And although the answer is there, all we need to do is to bring our thinking into focus, into that one point, and to align ourselves with it. The Buddhist teaching of right thinking, the pathway of right thinking.
Yes, and if we can always remember that, and we can think of just have one word that is important to us, or one phrase, and then use that in a constructive way, because we have to make our own plan in our own minds of what works best for us. But the point is to be able to stick with one thought until we think it through.
Very, very important. And yet, as we move from thought to thought, we follow through and finish with so few things, and then we simply have to come back and learn them again.
Yes, and I'm sure you find that's true in your business, not only in your spiritual work, but in your business, in a business sense. We thank you for joining us on Confident Living. Dr. Michael Costello and I welcome you to join us each Sunday at 2:30. Thank you. Goodbye.
Confident